Hi everyone, this is Zunker Chapter 11, Career Counseling for Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender Clients. One note I want to say is that because this is my area of specialty, some of the things I'm going to tell you when we go through, I disagree with the book, and I think it's because there's more modern ideas when it comes to this population than what the book is offering. Okay? All right, so let's continue. LGBT clients. Growing trend for more open discussion about the effects of sexual orientation on career development. Did you even think about that? More lesbians and gays are open about discussing issues at the workplace. More businesses are supporting gay and lesbian groups and networks. See this as another group, sexual orientation component to diversity training programs. So now you want to think a little bit about, have you, at the place where you're working, have you been trained to be more aware about LGBT people and let's say the diversity that they add into the workplace? However, sexual orientation in general and their effects on career development and bias in the workplace are far from settled. So what that is basically saying is, although now we're starting to acknowledge it, it doesn't mean that people actually don't have problems still with this population. And because people have problems with this, it affects the people who work there. Does a person want to work there at all? Would they even apply for a job there because of this? Counselors may want to build an extensive body of resources, including specific information on organizations and companies that support LGBT employees. And that's a question that I always pose for my students is, how many people are feeling comfortable working with this population? And usually I get a good amount of people raising their hands. But then when I ask, hey, can you give me some specific LGBT resources? The hands go down immediately. There's really not that many people who know more than, let's say, the LGBT Center. And even then, when I ask you where it is, you might not know where it is, right? So you're like, oh, I'll find it on the internet. So because there is a lack of information and resources, that's something that you want to consider if you want to become fully equipped to help people who identify in this population. Keep in mind the subtle, insidious nature of heterosexual bias and use this for reflection. So what that is saying is we were raised as acknowledging people as him or her, man and woman. But if you, as millennials, are more aware, there's a lot more self-expression available in this world today, right? So instead, there's some recommendations when it comes to that. So use gender-free language. So you know how usually we say, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to blah, blah, blah. Instead, you want to say, hi, everyone, or hi, folks, welcome to, this agency or whatever. That way, we are inclusive of people who don't necessarily identify as either male or female. Become familiar with models of LGBT identity formation, and that's something that we will talk about in this chapter, is that there's actually models about how people, uh, uh, let's say, find out that they are realize that they are LGBT when they're younger, let's say, and then how they are treated because of the environment around them that influences how people see people who are LGBT. Identify a consultant who can provide helpful information or feedback. So again, make friends with people who are LGBT professionals that can help you answer some questions if you have that. Provide effective coping techniques for different types of oppression. So when you hear people say, I was discriminated against because I have a disability, or I was discriminated against because I am an African American, a Hispanic, or Latinx, or Asian person, or Native American, you can sort of sympathize or empathize with that. But how about when someone says I'm discriminated against because I'm gay, or lesbian, or bisexual, or transgender? Can you become empathetic to that type of situation? Become familiar with local support networks. As a counselor, are you ready to work with the LGBT population? And in box 11.1 on page 264, there's a questionnaire that allows you to rate yourself to see whether or not you are comfortable working with the LGBT population. Some general counseling issues, stereotyping about the kind of jobs that gay and lesbians commonly hold. Gay men are thought to occupy traditional female jobs, such as interior decorator or hairstylist, and lesbians are firefighters, truck drivers, and auto mechanics. So already right there, we're kind of like flipping those gender roles because they're identifying as gay or lesbian. But the truth is, there are many, many gay men who are, let's say, doctors and lawyers and, I don't know, lumberjacks, uh, uh, very masculine stuff. And there are also lesbians who work in beauty, let's say, and stuff like that. So, but the thing is, that's what we are taught or shown, whether it's in the media or, by our family members or the people around us, that we sometimes assume that that's only kind of jobs that they can get. Everyone should be able to consider all career options. Counselors should challenge stereotypes in an effort to expand a client's perception of what is an appropriate career. Homophobia is an irrational fear. That means there's no reason why you would have this fear. Hatred and intolerance of LGBT persons. This has led to violence, discrimination, and rejection of sexual minorities in society in general and also in the workplace. Fear and hatred can enhance negative stereotypes. When you're afraid of someone, most likely you're going to discriminate against them, unfortunately, right? I'm not saying that everyone will do that, but it will happen. You want to avoid that because you've been told, you've been shown somehow that this population is bad, so you want to avoid them. Internalized homophobia. So internalized basically means inside you, right? Based on beliefs that focus on rejection of sexual minorities. So during identity development of the person, some sexual minorities who are greatly affected by internalized homophobia reject themselves as appropriate individuals and form a dislike for self and self-hatred for their feelings of attraction. Adolescents might not fully understand the precise meaning of their differences in sexual identity, but quickly learn it is regarded negatively. They're highly anxious, fearful, guilty, and self-loathing. And self-loathing means hating oneself. So what this is all about is, let's say that you are a lesbian, right? And all through life, you were told that lesbians are gross, they're bad people, they're evil, they're child molesters, and all this stuff. But you identify as a lesbian. So then you're going, is there something wrong with me? Because all those things are not me, but that's what they say about lesbians. So then you start to hate yourself because you're like, why am I feeling this way if these are things that are associated with bad stuff? So that's a person internalizing that hatred to themselves, and they think that they themselves are bad. And so that you can see how that can cause depression and bad behavior such as alcoholism or substance abuse, things to do to avoid facing the reality of who they are. And millennials, you guys are awesome because you guys are saying, all this stuff is, fine and cool. It's so modern and all this stuff. But historically, it's been seen that people who are identifying as an LGBT person usually have been raised being told that they're bad people. Many lesbians and gay children develop mental health problems because of this. Counselors must be aware of their own homophobic and heterosexist bias when counseling sexual minorities. So if you are someone who does not like people who are part of this LGBT population, you need to consider whether or not counseling is something that you should do. Okay, I'm letting you know now that there are going to be a lot of people that you interact with who will identify as LGBT. They might not tell you, and you might not know, but part of that might be because they can read your body language, your attitude, the way that you talk, that you are not tolerant, you're not welcoming of people who are of this population. So when you say you don't know any gay or lesbian or bi or trans person, maybe it's actually because of the way that people perceive you, because of the way that you act. So that's something that you want to start thinking about and reflecting and asking yourself why. Okay? Try to understand the complexity of a sexual orientation different than their own. Can you do that? Sexual minorities are not welcome in some work environments. And you can think about, for a while, the military, right? It was don't ask, don't tell. That means I don't want to know, so don't tell me because if you do, I'm not going to like it, right? And then there's also other work environments, maybe a very masculine, auto mechanic place or warehouse place where things are about manliness, right? And being strong and and stuff like that. You might not necessarily want someone who identifies as gay because of it, or they might hide themselves because of that. In some states, they do not have the same rights, and that's actually quite true. See career planning in a different way than heterosexuals will see career planning. Because even though they might want to work in a specific place, they know that that place does not welcome people who are part of this population. So they're going to say, you know what, I don't want to work in this place. So already now they've been influenced by society, by the environment, whereas, we want people to find jobs in the place where they want to work. So revisiting what we said before about language, the APA talks about heterosexual bias language. And actually, if you look at the newest edition of the APA, they've actually included even more stuff to really be up to date to gender-free pronouns. But let's talk a little bit about some of the stuff that this book specifically talks about when it comes to the APA. Gender-free pronouns or nouns, such as partner or significant other. So instead of, let's say if you had a female client, and you say, do you have a husband, right? That's a very heterosexual thing to assume if you don't know who this person is. So instead, I would encourage you to say, do you have a partner or significant other? But obviously now, also in America, people who identify as LGBT can still get married or can get married now, right? So you can actually say, do you have a wife as opposed to just a husband if it's a woman, a woman client. However, remember there's now more gender expression, so that might actually not be appropriate as well. So if you want to say partner, significant other, spouse, that's a lot more inclusive, than saying, do you have a husband? Avoid the term homosexual because it sounds very medical or scientific. So instead, I would suggest and recommend, and the book does as well, is just use the word gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, right? Because the word homosexual just does sound very, very scientific. And it doesn't sound like you're very comfortable with this population, and that's why you don't want to use the more familiar terms. So the same thing happens when it comes to the word heterosexual. Instead, a lot of people just use the word straight instead. Okay? Use sexual orientation and not sexual preference, because preference means that you can choose to be something, right? Like, what is your preference? Do you prefer Chinese food over Mexican food? And that's something that you can choose, right? We're talking about people who identify as one way and actually don't choose to do that. They were, as is culturally accepted now, is that people are born this way, like Lady Gaga says. All right, transgender. This book is minimal at best when it comes to this population, like I said. So let's talk a little bit about it in this chapter. Someone who identifies with both male and female roles, or as a member or of an alternative gender, or the opposite sex. So a trans person may live as a member of the sex opposite from his or her biological sex. So let's say that the person was born male physically, but identifies as a female. So that means that this person may identify as trans or transgender, right? Hopefully that makes sense. And now in millennial times, modern times right now, some people feel like they are not part of this binary of man and woman. Binary means like two choices, right? Are you a man or are you a woman? Some people identify as something, let's say, in between or not at all. So to be respectful, we want to let them identify themselves, and then you can, go along with that. Sexual reassignment surgery or gender confirming surgery used for genital reconstruction is accompanied by rigorous psychological preparation. Gender identity disorder is used to describe a person who feels trapped in the body that he or she considers to be the wrong sex. People who are trans are often subjected to intense criticism and disapproval, often experience rejection and isolation, and experiences a significant amount of oppression. And one thing that I also want to say about this is that not every trans person will actually have surgery, okay? So just because you know someone who is trans doesn't mean that they can't afford or even want to have the surgery. They might live comfortably the way that they are identifying as trans, and that is something that is actually quite common. It doesn't always have to be around surgeries. Surgeries can be very dangerous, can be very traumatic, and not be very successful either. So some people choose not to have this. They might just take hormones so that they can raise the level of either testosterone or estrogen, whatever it is that they're trying to work out with their doctors. Many states now have legislation that prohibits discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation. In 2003, Supreme Court ruled that states could no longer criminalize private consensual same-sex activities. So what that is saying is the Supreme Court says if two men want to have sex together in their own home or in their house or whatever, they can do it. It should not necessarily be a crime, right? Um, and same thing going with to women or whomever the parties are. 2011, U.S. Armed Forces repealed a law that was built around don't ask, don't tell policy. During that time period, people were very uncomfortable. They didn't know exactly what to do. Part of it is politics, right? But it is a stepping stone towards accepting LGBT people in the military. Okay, and of course, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today you might not necessarily agree with, and that is totally fine. But in counseling, we encourage you to have an open mind when it comes to this population that a lot of people have oppressed, have discriminated against, have treated very, very poorly, have hurt physically and mentally as well. Okay? Discrimination of sexual minorities at work. Overt discrimination is violence directed at LGBT individuals. It's also known as gay bashing. Reluctant to report because it will call attention to their sexual orientation. So now imagine if you were a gay man working at an agency and someone beat you up at that agency, right? Um, and then you need to report it. And then when you report it, they're like, why did someone beat you up? And if you say it's because I'm gay, for some people they don't feel very comfortable revealing that, right? So then some people actually keep it quiet and move on because they need to work. They need to have money so they can feed themselves and their family members and pay bills and stuff like that. So and finding a job is not necessarily very easy, is it? So something like this can cause people to actually not report these things. So then it becomes the statistics are underreported, right? And that's not going to do any service for anyone. Hidden discrimination occurs in hiring, promotion, and compensation. So that means that people who are in power, bosses, employers, or HR people who are anti-LGBT can, go, I don't want to give this person a raise or I don't want to give this person a promotion. I'd rather give it to the person who's straight as opposed to the one who's gay. And so that's what we're talking about when we say diminished opportunities for advancement. Relays a message that this person is not wanted in an organization. Imagine if all the people who are working at the lowest levels were all people of color or people who are LGBT. You can understand how there's discrimination and you want to keep that group or those populations down, and that's not cool, right? That's not appropriate. That's not fair. If you do good work, you should probably be promoted if the opportunity is there. Overt and hidden discrimination makes lesbians and gays not want to make their sexual orientation known. They're worried about people who might blackmail them, which means basically like, you better do this for me or you do my job because I'm going to tell everyone that you're gay, right? Ostracism is meaning basically you don't want to have them included in the group. So let's say that one of your coworkers has a party and then they invite everyone except for the person who's gay. That would be, ostracizing that person. There might be sexual harassment, right? So imagine if there's a lesbian at the workplace and then the man who is the boss or someone goes, you know what? Really, you just haven't found the real right man to make you straight, That would be sexual harassment right there. Exclusion or avoidance. Termination, meaning getting fired, and then also there's that lavender ceiling. We've talked previously about the glass ceiling. So lavender is a color that's often associated with the LGBT population. So they're saying, there's a ceiling that you see that reminds you that the reason why that ceiling is lavender is that you can't get through it because of who you identify as. Rosie et al. In 2011 says that experience harassment on a weekly basis for people who are LGBT. 30% of gay, lesbian, and bisexual respondents said that, and 45% of transgender respondents have reported that. So this is on a weekly basis of being harassed. 45% of trans people say that that's how they what they have to deal with every week, and then 30% of gay, lesbian, and bisexual. And you can probably understand why. It's probably because transgender people are often a little bit more noticeable. okay, during their transition or, post, pre, whatever it is, their transition. And so people will make fun of that, right? And harass them because of it. So they're a more visible target than a person who is gay or lesbian or bisexual because you don't necessarily know whether or not a person really is gay or lesbian or bi until they disclose, right? People can hide those things very, very easily because they've been learning how to hide it all their lives. Now the book talks a little bit about the model of homosexual identity formation. I know we said not to use the word homosexual, but this is an old model from 1979 and then updated in 1984. So there are 6 stages when it comes to forming your gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans identity. The first is called identity confusion. That's stage 1. Stage 2 is identity comparison. Stage 3 is identity tolerance. Stage 4 is identity acceptance. Stage 5 is identity pride. And then stage 6 is identity synthesis. There's a full explanation on page 268 in the book, but we'll also go through a little bit of it as we go along as well. And of course, I just want to remind you that these are stages. It doesn't mean that everyone goes through all these stages. It doesn't mean that everyone goes through the stages in this specific order as well. It might jump around. It really does depend on the person, right? Some sexual minorities may recycle through the model depending on experiences and encounters. So they might finally accept themselves for a little bit, but then something happens with their family, and then they have to revert back to a previous step. The time it takes to move through the different stages in the model can vary as well. So, maybe you are not comfortable with disclosing, but you're comfortable with yourself. Some people are very comfortable with themselves and comfortable with disclosing. So again, you can see that the time periods between those might differ depending on the individual. There appears to be developmental differences between LGBT persons that would result in different patterns of identity development because, again, each person is raised differently. There are families that are very welcoming and open and accepting of LGBT people, and there are families that are not. So you can see how a family that might be very open and welcoming to it, the child might come out earlier, whereas a family where they really, really hate this population, that child is not necessarily going to reveal anything because they're afraid of safety, afraid of being unloved by their family, and all these other possible things. So again, you can see again the differences. Sexual orientation is only one variation in human development. Again, there are other things as well. Cultural differences in sexual orientation. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of minorities and when it comes to being LGBT. So in Asian cultures, Chung and Katayama in 1999 said that heterosexism and homophobia are more prominent and intense in Asian cultures. Think about whether or not you know anyone who is LGBT who identifies as being an Asian. And if you don't, maybe it's partly because of their culture. It doesn't really welcome, right? But then there are other cultures that are a little bit more accepting and welcoming of this population. Again, it all varies. There are 3 overarching reasons, and this is what the book says. Whether or not it's still something that you would agree with or I agree with is debatable because, again, culture changes and shifts all the time. But what it says in the book is philosophy of harmony and complementary parts of the Chinese yin yang. So you know that kind of black and white symbol that's kind of like a circle with the teardrop shapes that are fit together? What they're saying is in traditional Asian cultures, there's always one and then there's the opposite, and together they balance each other out. So they see man and woman as balancing each other out. So having 2 men or 2 women, for some reason, for that culture goes, it doesn't balance. So it's weird. It's not harmonized. It's not working in harmony. And obviously, that's something that we would want to talk about when it comes to Asian culture in America. Traditional gender roles and family systems in most Asian cultures are so highly honored, same-sex orientations are unacceptable. So usually there's a ranking. Man is higher than the woman, right? Men have more rights than the woman and stuff like that. So for them, because they're so used to this type of tradition, what happens when there's 2 men, and there's no children? There's no more hierarchy. So then it kind of throws them off. And this is one reason why they're not accepting of it. Prominence of agrarian societies in Asian countries in which farmlands are passed down from one traditional family to the next. So we're talking about inheritance, right? One family member or this generation has worked so hard to get, all this stuff, all this money, and they want to pass it down to their children. And then they're hoping that this will become a safety net for that family generation, and then that's going to go on, kind of keeping like the family name. But what happens if there's one generation where someone identifies as gay or lesbian and doesn't have children? Then why are they working so hard to pass it down to their children if they're not going to, let's say, pass it down to their children? So then, what happens? And this kind of need to have a legacy, right, is very, very strong in some Asian cultures. Whether or not you agree is, a different thing, right? But this is something that you want to start thinking about how certain cultures see the LGBT population. Lesbian and gay Asians have trouble being accepted in white gay and lesbian communities. There's a double minority status. So because we live in America, the dominant culture is white, right? And think about just beauty standards. When we think about who we think are attractive, usually we think of white actors and actresses like Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie. So what's going on is people don't necessarily see what Asian males are as considered attractive when they're compared to, let's say, the white people or Caucasian people, right? So that's what they're talking about when it comes to a double minority status. They're Asian, and then they're also, let's say, gay and stuff like that. Obviously, there's a whole issue and difference when it comes to Asian women in American society. There's a fetishized look to them, right? But then again, we're not talking about just heterosexual Asian women. We're talking about lesbian Asian women, right? Modern gay and lesbian identities are Western constructs because they're much more open to talking about it than Asian cultures. East Asian cultures have no comparable sexual identities because it was such a hush-hush conversation. It doesn't have a lot in the histories that we have in America when it comes to gay rights, lesbian rights, bisexual rights, and trans rights. Discussions about sexuality are taboo and are considered highly embarrassing even among friends. So we're talking about a group of people who don't even want to talk about their problems, right? Just their typical everyday problems, let alone talk about a family member being gay or their child being gay because it's so embarrassing for them. They don't want to talk about any of these things. Asian culture often likes to keep their family business private, and I'm sure other cultures as well, but in this section right now we're talking about our Asian culture, right? It's a private matter and are not expressed in public. So sometimes Asian people also believe that if you pretend it doesn't exist or don't talk about it, it doesn't exist. Obviously, that becomes a generational problem because it does exist even when you pretend it doesn't. Individuality is also not a priority in Asian cultures. So what that is saying is if the parents are saying you should not be gay, and let's say they think it is a choice, then they're going to say, don't be gay, right? And they don't necessarily understand the complexities of gender identity and sexual orientation. African American culture, in a 1989 study by Loa Kano, similar to Asian American lesbians and gays, that gay men are seen as inferior members of the gay community. Again, in gay culture, white men tend to be the dominant one, and that's what everyone is comparing you to. So if you're a gay black man, you're being compared to a gay white man, and you will be seen as inferior to Caucasian communities. Seen negatively as wanting to be female, cross-dressing, threatening family child-rearing responsibilities. So within the African American culture, what that's saying or suggesting is that they assume that if you are a gay black man, you actually want to become a woman. And that's not the same thing because if you are born male and want to be a woman or born woman and wanting to be a man, that's more about trans issues. But for a lot of cultures, they think that being gay is the same thing as being trans, and those are two different things. Gay men usually are happy being men, right? And not wanting to be women. But within this culture, they might think that if you're a gay man, you might want to become a woman, and if you're a gay woman, you might actually want to be a man. Seen negatively as wanting to be female, cross-dressing, threatening family or child-rearing responsibilities. Again, just to emphasize that. In another study, 1,400 black, gay, and lesbians in 1997 said that same-sex activities are often more hidden in African American communities than in white ones. And if you've watched, let's say, a Tyler Perry movie, you'll know that there's a lot of this kind of down low culture, or the DL, right? Keep it down low. And because of this, it's so secretive that people actually do harm to a lot of people. Maybe the gay man is expected to marry a woman even though he doesn't want to, but that's part of the expectations. And so he'll marry a woman, have children with her, but really on the down low, is going to become who he is, which is a gay man, right? So if expectations in society did not expect him to marry a woman, he might not have married a woman, and that woman might have been more happier finding an actual straight man to marry and have children with, right? But because of societal expectations in the culture, they'll do that, and then suddenly the wife feels like she's being portrayed, that the man is a liar, and all these things. Interracial partners are relatively common. And so because what it's saying there is because the African American community is so harsh, so hated when it comes to, or hateful when it comes to being gay, that they actually will go, I don't want to deal with this my own community. I'm going to actually marry outside that community, whether it is with a Caucasian man, if it's a gay black man, or an Asian man, or a Latino man, or Latinx man, instead because I don't want to deal with this, right? And that can happen. And so you can see that more gay black men might actually be with a person of a different ethnicity. Latinx culture. Now let's talk about that. Lesbians also fear rejection in the Hispanic community and receive marginal support in the gay and lesbian community. So we're focusing on lesbians when it comes to this part right here, is that there is a fear of being kicked out of the family. Okay, gay and lesbians have three choices. They can choose to stay within the gay and lesbian community. They can not address it and just stay within the Latinx community, or they can shift and go live in the white heterosexual mainstream society. Coming out as bisexual rather than gay or lesbian is something that might happen first. And this actually kind of happens with a lot of different cultures where, let's say that there's a gay man. He might not necessarily just straight out say, I'm gay. He might say, I'm bi, right? So don't make fun of a person who identifies as, bi and say, oh no, you're just gay, right? Again, it's a journey. Some people have to go through and process who they are. They have to see if it's safe to do the things that they want to do, right? And unfortunately, this also then becomes something that people make fun of for bisexual people is like, oh, well, then you're just lesbian or gay. You just haven't gotten there yet. However, bisexual people are bisexual people, and you should not think that this is just a phase in between being from going from straight to gay. Okay, bisexual people are bisexual people, and that is it. Okay, some live in three choices separately, but soon develop anxiety and fears of betrayal. So again, if they have to choose all these different areas, worrying about one group finding out or whatever, it becomes a very uncomfortable life in the long run. They can probably balance it for a little bit, but hey, one day you're at that gay club and then suddenly you bump into a cousin or a friend of your cousin and they're like, hey, why are you here? And stuff like that. And then families might hear about it and then suddenly it's like, a telenovela that way. Some Latinx countries accept being LGBT, but some are influenced by the church. And as we know, with Latinx culture, it's heavily Catholic. Doesn't always have to be, but it is heavily ruled by the church. And so, although they are accepting, religion then becomes a factor about, guilt and all that stuff when it comes to God. Native American culture, mid-18th century America, French missionaries saw Native American men who dressed in women's clothing and assumed female roles and accepted men as sexual partners. French called them and the women who dressed in warriors and hunters as berdache, or it's also translated as basically male homosexual. Don't use this term. It is outdated and considered inappropriate. Okay? But in certain tribes, this book is using this word, were accepted. Now they're known more as Two-Spirit tradition. They don't identify as LGBT, rather, but having male and female spirits, and seen as a verb more than a noun. Okay, so it means it's a more action-oriented word than it is, like, hey, you two-spirit, and stuff like that. Don't say that. I just want to also preface this with this. If you are part of the Native American culture, then yes, you can use the word two-spirit. Do not use it if you are not part of this, because this is a word that's strongly associated with Native American culture, and it's seen as offensive for people outside to take these terms. Um, I know it sounds really poetic and beautiful and kind of, eloquent, but I want to stress very, very heavily right now. Don't use this phrase if you are not part of Native American culture. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're gay or lesbian or bi or trans. It's kind of an umbrella term, as I've been told. Um, but it's also very different compared to, let's say, westernized terminologies. Will you see some people who are Native American who might associate or uh, uh, have a different definition? Definitely, but this is what the overall generalized understanding of what two-spirit is. Counseling LGBT-oriented youth. In working with LGBT-oriented youth, the complex task of sexual identity can be disruptive. So what that is saying is, typically when you're growing up, if you identify as straight, you have certain things that you have to go through. But for a person who grows up and is born gay, lesbian, bi, and trans, there's certain things that they have to deal with that people who are straight don't have to deal with. And so it's a little bit more complicated, okay? Many sexual minority adolescents abandoned by their friends, were rejected by their families, had failing grades, and were involved with substance abuse because of coping, maybe because of internalized homophobia, like we talked about earlier. Half of the sample had run away from home, been arrested, or had a sexually transmitted disease. A smaller minority had attempted suicide, accepted money for sexual favors, or been sexually victimized or sexually abused. So if you were going to work with children and you work with the homeless population, 100% you will be working with people who identify in this population. There are many people who run away from homes because they don't feel safe at home, or their family members kicked them out because they found out that that person was gay, lesbian, bi, or trans. And so, as a young person who might not be able to legally work, you might have to steal, you might have to have, commit crimes, you might sell your body, do sex work for money to survive. So can you really hate a person for trying to survive in different means like that? We need to see the bigger picture. We don't just look at the person and go, oh, that person who's a hooker, and say that as a bad thing. We don't know what their story is. So we want to get to know that person before we judge them. And I hope that you do that. Remember those biases that our personal selves have when we are growing up. We need to examine whether or not those biases are actually correct, realistic, and, even necessary anymore. And then, of course, there are a smaller minority, but there is still people who are so embarrassed, who are so hurt because they realize that they are gay and don't want to be part of it because of the culture that they're raised into or raised by their family members, that they actually kill themselves because they think they're such a burden. And that's something that we definitely do not want them to do. Ashford and LaCroix in 2013 says that suicide rates are higher for sexual minority youth than just straight minority youth. Originally, HIV and AIDS was seen as a gay, basically, disease. It is not, and safe sex and drug use needs to be taught to all adolescents, okay? I believe right now there are actually more people who are heterosexual or straight who have HIV than there are with the gay population. But we see it as a gay disease because when it first started, more people who were gay were actually seen with it. Okay, but it actually now, it doesn't matter who you are. Everyone can get HIV, unfortunately. However, I will say this: it is not something that will kill you anymore if you get the right medication and take care of yourself. There are many people who live very long, happy lives with HIV. They can actually have partners, they can have children and all that other stuff. But obviously you want to talk about this all out with your medical doctor and your partners and stuff like that. Counselors who recognize the influence of sexual orientation on career development will create an atmosphere in which sexuality can be discussed openly. Okay, so if you are able to make it welcoming, people might be able to talk about their sexuality, their HIV, status maybe, and stuff like that, and then that will allow you to get to know the person as a whole. Remember, in counseling and stuff like that, we talk about seeing people in a holistic way, in every component about them, not just one component like disability or ethnicity or work. We want to see them for all of them as they are as a person. So I want to ask you then, are you ready to convey full acceptance of sexual minorities if you have not already? I hope you do. And if not, maybe you are on your journey towards that. Career counseling for LGBT clients. Stage one is pre-counseling preparation. Evaluate your own awareness of sexual minority worldviews and cultures. So, again, there was a survey that you can take in the book. Number one, being gay, lesbian, or bisexual is not a pathological condition. Pathological means disease, right, or bad, or unhealthy. It is not. You're not sick if you are gay, lesbian, or bisexual. Two, the origins of sexual orientation are not completely known. So we don't necessarily know if it's genetics, although more and more people are saying that it is, or what, right? Maybe it's a little combination of nature and nurture. We don't know. So maybe it's a little bit different for everyone. Three, LGBT persons lead fulfilling and satisfying lives. Four, there are a variety of LGBT lifestyles. So it's not just one type of life that a person can lead. There's many of them. Five, the LGBT persons who attend counseling with a desire to change their sexual orientation should not be forced into change. So we've actually, there's a term, it's called conversion therapy, where some people believe that you can make a person who is gay straight. Okay. The APA actually says that it does not work and actually does a lot of harm. Okay. And often this is based on religion, but it doesn't always have to. And the APA has declared that it is illegal to do this. LGBT affirmative individuals and group counseling should be available to anyone who needs it. LGBT ethnic minorities should be perceived as having double or triple minority status. So, for example, if you're African American and female and lesbian, you have three things going against you when it comes to discrimination, oppression, all those things. So, when you have someone like that and they're going to look for work, you have to be sensitive that there are three things that they have to deal with that a person who is, let's say, a Caucasian male doesn't have to deal with, right? And so I want you as a counselor or as the person who's going to work with someone like that to be aware of it, okay? We're not asking you to solve any of that. We're just saying you need to understand that there's a reason why she might not want to work at a specific place, even though you think she should. Okay, counselors take the multicultural counseling checklist in Appendix B, and then client take the career counseling checklist in Appendix C. Stage two is called establishing an affirmative, trusting relationship. Supportive when clients talk about being discriminated during hiring or while working. So if you have a client that says, someone said something negative about me being bisexual, you want to be able to empathize with that. You're not, again, trying to fix anything. You want to be able to be there for them so that if they have questions, they want to vent, they want to ask, or say something, that you're there to be there for them as a support network. Stage three is identifying client identity issues. So again, we talked about the CAS HIF model earlier, the one with the 6 model, so please look at that in the book. Evaluate the readiness of the client to make career decisions, because depending on where they are in that, they might not necessarily be ready to go out there and work just yet. Stage four, identifying variables that may limit career choice. There's negative influences because of discrimination, bias, and stereotyping. So to be able to realize that for some people who are part of this population that they might not be able to work in a specific place and to be able to talk about that, right? I'll give you an example. Usually you will not see gay men being kindergarten teachers. And part of the reason is the stereotype, the bias, the discrimination that they think that they are pedophiles. And obviously being gay and being a pedophile are two different things, right? But people often think that they're the same thing and they are not. And that's something that I need to clarify with you. You already didn't know that. Stage five is tailoring assessment. Client concerns are established as sets of needs and appropriate intervention strategies are suggested. personal and career concerns may be addressed simultaneously. So while you're working with this person, you want to be aware of that, but then also still talk about their work and make sure that you have those right understanding of their abilities and stuff like that. So you're not basing it just because they're gay or lesbian, bi, or trans, but also because of their work abilities as well, where they should go. Stage 6 is job search strategies. Prepare clients for developing their resumes, preparing job interviews, and locating sexual minority affirmative organizations. So if you're working with a client there and they have questions about, let's say, discrimination against their sexual identity or orientation, that they also have those resources for them as well. But you also want to help them like you help everyone else with their resumes and preparing for the job interview. Here are some web pages that the book recommends. I've hyperlinked them for you for the first 7 or 8 of them right there. And it talks about some of the resources that you can use to start off your toolbox on LGBT concerns. Unique issues and needs coming out at work is something that a straight person doesn't have to, do. A straight person does not have to go, hey everyone at work, I'm straight, right? So this is definitely something that's unique towards this population. Multidimensional process involving a number of factors and variables that include the client's identity development. Again, that CAST HIF model, review it and then see where that person is. The LGBT affirmative status of the employing organization. So how welcoming is that organization towards LGBT? And sometimes companies will say that they are, but it doesn't mean that all the employees are going to be as welcoming. You know what I mean? So again, we have to also see it from many levels as well. Okay. And then also there are some organizations that say that they're LGBT friendly, but they're really just not. They want to do that because they want to look like they're very open-minded, but they actually are not. And you'll hear about that from LGBT people. Knowledge of the client's sexual orientation by family, friends, and associates is something that they have to think about. Imagine, let's say, you might go in a straight, let's say, agency or an agency with many straight people. When they say, hey, how's your weekend? You can say something like, oh, if it's a male, my girlfriend and I went to do this, right? But if it's a lesbian and she's not out, she can't say, my girlfriend and I went to do this on the weekend or whatever, because then she will out herself or come out at work and she might have to face some discriminatory repercussions. So she might say, no, I didn't do anything. So she's not being her authentic self. And if she's not her authentic self, she's not going to be as productive as the statistics say. If you're not happy at your workplace, you might not necessarily produce as much, right? So it's something that we kind of assume that a person who is male will have a female partner or the other way around or whatever, when it really is potentially very different in an LGBT population. Status of the client's partner and what coming out would mean to him or her. Hey, and there's another thing that you want to think about is, let's say that there are 2 gay men who are partners, right? One might be out and one might not be out. So then there is internal conflict right there. Maybe the person who is out will say, I want you to come out. I want you to come out. It's going to be okay. It might be tough right now, but it'll be better later on. But for the other person, they might not be ready just yet. Again, each person's journey is very different based on many factors. The way they were born or how they were born, in the sense of family-wise, like, their struggles and stuff. And then other experiences. Maybe they were gay bashed, right? Like we talked about earlier. So there's also conflict there. And then the readiness of the client to face the workplace as a known sexual minority. Because, again, for some places, Susan might be now known as the lesbian at the workplace, right? Or Michael or Julio might be known as the gay guy. And that's not something that people want to be, like a token. Should a person come out just as a small group of coworkers? Will coming out enhance the chances of advancement or detract from it? These are things that they're going to talk about and consider. If they come out to their best friend at work, their best coworker, will they be able to really fully trust that coworker not telling other people? What happens if they accidentally slip and then say, oh, oops, or whatever? Then more people might know. And then from there, there might be an avalanche like, oh, Maria, we heard that you're a lesbian. Is that true? right? That's kind of silly. I know it sounds kind of funny, but that can actually be very devastating for a person who's not ready to come out or afraid of, let's say, not getting a promotion. Being in the closet is a painful and disturbing experience for many people because they're not being their authentic self. We hope that everyone is who they are, and get to feel comfortable in their bodies. But for some people who are in the closet, they're still in that process. So it can be very, very painful and disturbing for them. Gay affirmative policies do not stop discrimination and harassment in the workplace. Like we said before, just because an organization says that we don't do this, we don't harass people who are gay, there might be people who are employees, coworkers who will, right? And they don't care. So then it becomes another issue right there. Coming out in low-level jobs or non-professional work might even be more risky because they're more conservative or traditional family members, and or just people who believe in traditional stuff who are not as progressive in those kind of lower-paying jobs, and there might actually be more discrimination in those populations.